Hi, this is usually a German podcast, so if you only speak English, please skip ahead for the interview. Hallo, wie schön, dass du hier bist. Ich bin Miriam und dieser Podcast ist eine Ode an unsere innere Sanftheit und Intuition. Er ist die freundliche Stimme in deinem Ohr, die dich daran erinnert, dass es okay ist, das Leben im eigenen Tempo zu leben und bedingungslos auf dich selbst zu hören. Ich bin Miriam und bin Meditationslehrerin und Inner Voice Mentorin. Und hier verrate ich dir alles, was ich darüber weiß, wie wir ein liebevolles inneres Zuhause kultivieren können und wir so unser Leben in ein magisches verwandeln. Heute habe ich eine ganz besondere Folge für euch, denn ich habe mit einer ganz lieben Inner Voice Freundin eine Podcast-Folge aufgenommen und wir haben ganz viel darüber gesprochen, wie das Ganze so im Leben konkret aussehen kann, wenn wir der Inner Voice folgen. Und kleines Disclaimer, dein Weg kann komplett anders aussehen als der von mir oder der von Krystal, die heute ihren Weg, ihren Inner Voice Weg in dieser Folge beschreibt. Und wir sprechen ganz viel darüber, was passiert, wenn wir komplett surrendern und erlauben, der Inner Voice zu folgen und comfortable mit dem Unkomfortablen zu werden und wie wichtig das eben ist, auch diesen inneren Winter zu erlauben, diese ganzen Jahreszeiten oder Phasen, durch die wir gehen und eben so ein bisschen mit dem Leben zu schwimmen, anstatt die ganze Zeit dagegen anzukämpfen. Ja, es ist einfach ein ganz, ganz wunderschönes Gespräch. Ich wünsche euch ganz, ganz, ganz viel Spaß. Und bevor wir hineinspringen, möchte ich noch ganz kurz erzählen, dass ihr euch jetzt für meinen Kurs anmelden könnt. Ich habe nämlich für euch einen Kurs zusammengestellt und der heißt Blooming from Within. Und wie der Name schon sagt, werdet ihr darin lernen, das Leben von innen nach außen zu leben, von innen heraus nach außen zu leben. Denn wenn wir uns im Inneren komplett und liebevoll und wohl fühlen, dann spiegelt sich das auch im Außen wieder. Dann spiegelt sich das in unserem Leben wieder. Und wie ihr vielleicht wisst, wenn ihr meinen Podcast hört, habe ich mich mit diesem Thema schon jahrelang beschäftigt und möchte euch jetzt einfach alle meine Tools und Erfahrungen wirklich praktisch weitergeben, dass ihr eben auch mehr Frieden in euch selber finden könnt, mehr Klarheit, mehr Sanftheit und mehr Liebe. Und da geht es ganz viel darum, der Inner Voice zu folgen, die Inner Voice zu hören, zu lernen, sich mit der Inner Voice zu verbinden und wirklich ganz, ganz tief auf sich selbst zu hören, aufs eigene Herz zu hören und den Mut zu finden, den eigenen Weg wirklich zu gehen. Und es geht auch ganz viel darum, wie wir Emotionen loslassen können, die uns vielleicht zurückhalten. Und es geht eben auch um ganz, ganz exquisite Selbstfürsorge und wirklich zu uns zu stehen, wieder in dieses Urvertrauen zu kommen, ein Leben zu erschaffen, was uns wirklich, wirklich entspricht und uns selber ganz, ganz nahe zu kommen und ein ganz liebevolles inneres Zuhause zu kultivieren, weil ich habe einfach gemerkt, je mehr ich das mache, und ich spreche da ja auch so viel im Podcast drüber, desto weicher und angenehmer fühlt sich einfach mein Leben an und es ist nicht mehr die ganze Zeit so ein gegen alles kämpfen und alles ist irgendwie eine Bedrohung und alles ist irgendwie und man muss sich die ganze Zeit beweisen und es ist immer alles irgendwie angespannt aber desto mehr ich mich einfach auf mich einlasse und liebevoll mit mir selbst bin, mit allen meinen Anteilen, mit allen meinen Traumata und sonst was, desto mehr kann mein ganzes System einfach so ausatmen und einfach der Inner Voice zu folgen ist einfach auch was so schön und manchmal auch herausfordernd sein kann, aber extrem so rewarding am Ende einfach ist, weil wir so ein bisschen die Saaten säen und dann die Sachen ernten können. Und ich habe irgendwie das Gefühl, dass ich auch einfach, seitdem ich mich mit meiner Inner Voice immer verbinde, mehr mich selber verstehe und vor allem auch verstehe, wie andere ticken. Also diese Unterscheidung zu machen zwischen Herz und Verstand und einfach so ein bisschen mehr Durchblick im Leben und Klarheit zu finden, wirklich zu wissen, was ich will. Und das war für mich einfach so ein extremer Gamechanger und deswegen würde ich so gerne an euch weitergeben und anstatt hier immer im Podcast zu labern, voll gerne mit euch zu labern und euch das Inner Voicen zu zeigen, mit euch zu Inner Voicen, euch den Raum zu halten. Wir können zusammen Inner Voicen. Es wird 3 Live-Termine geben und 2 Module. Es wird einen ganzen Monat lang gehen. Das heißt, ihr habt ganz viel Zeit, das alles zu integrieren und wir können zusammen in so einer schönen kleinen Gruppe sein und ihr könnt euch auch gegenseitig unterstützen und auch Menschen kennenlernen, die auch feinfühlig sind und ganz exquisit und ganz wunderbar. Ja, ich möchte es einfach unbedingt weitergeben, dass wir alle ein bisschen mehr ins Tun kommen, anstatt immer nur darüber nachzudenken oder darüber zu reden oder eben im eigenen kleinen stillen Kämmerchen in der Meditation zu machen, sondern mehr zusammenzukommen. Und ich glaube, es ist so wichtig für unser Nervensystem, dass wir so gemeinsam Dinge tun. Deswegen würde ich mich total freuen, dich in meinem Kurs kennenzulernen und begrüßen zu dürfen. Und ja, mehr Infos findest du in dem Link in den Shownotes, wenn du das Ganze mit dir mal anschauen möchtest. Und jetzt gibt es den Kurs noch zum Early Bird Preis. Also schau gerne mal rein. Und es wird auch Meditationen geben und Journaling-Fragen. Und ich habe ganz, ganz, ganz viel Herz reingesteckt und freue mich einfach total, dass das Ganze jetzt euch zur Verfügung steht. Ich würde sagen, dann fangen wir einfach direkt mit dieser Folge an. Und ich wünsche dir ganz, ganz, ganz viel Spaß und Freude beim Anhören. Hi, Krystal. Welcome to my podcast. I'm so excited that you're here, and we've just been chatting for a little bit, and we really need to start this episode because otherwise we're going to chat it away and then we don't have to say anything anymore. But hello and welcome. I'm so excited to talk to you. Hello.
Likewise, Miriam. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
So for all the people listening, I used to have a podcast with some other friends, which was called Flow Motion. It's still existing, but that's where Krystal and I did an episode together. And I really enjoyed that episode. And it was like, I don't know, when was that actually? Do you remember? A year ago?
Yeah, a little more. Probably like January 2022 would be my guess.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that's been a while. Yeah. And I thought, because for some reason there was a message, I don't know how that happened, but I asked you if you wanted to come on my podcast, on my personal podcast. And so here we are. So could you maybe explain to the people who don't know about you, because I guess my audience, right, they're mostly German, and who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I run an online mystery school called the Aura Lab. And I call it a mystery school because that's the unfolding that we're on here, right? When I first started coaching and working with people one-to-one, and even in my own journey, I wanted the answers. And in working with my inner voice, I've realized the knowing, the hard answers are so much less interesting than being in union with the mystery and the unfolding. So I use inner voice work and human design to help people really understand the language of their own energy and connect to their intuition so that they have the kind of toolkit that's needed to move through the mystery with ease, with fun, with joy, and for them to sort of take those pieces on into whatever unfolds for themselves.
Oh, that's amazing. That sounds so good. I think that's such an important, part of this human experience to actually make peace with the mystery and with the transitions, with the not knowing and all that. So that sounds really, really lovely. And we met through IVFT. I mean, we didn't do IVFT together, so the inner voice facilitator training. So Krystal is also a student of Jess Lively or Bella Lively. She now goes by Bella.
Yeah.
So this is how we kind of met. Yeah. Tell me more what that means to you about the mystery and the going through that. What does that mean to you?
For me, it's about union, like really being in union with life rather than trying to force it or create it or manipulate it in a way that comes from, the very real part that we all have, the part of us that wants to force and manipulate and kind of strong arm life, right? Like that part is in all of us. And it's a part that I think we're invited to make peace with on this journey. But when I started inner voice work, and I want to tell you, it was actually Flow Motion that really bridged the gap for me and helped me to decide that it's really what I wanted to do. So big gratitude to past Miriam and the team who put that out. It was a huge part of my decision making. When I did IVFT, I really did it for myself. I knew kind of deep down I would do it with clients eventually, but I really did it for me. And when I started that process, I made the promise to myself that I would follow my inner voice no matter what. Like, even if it didn't make sense, even if my mind didn't understand, no matter what, I just made a commitment. No matter what it says, I'm going to listen and I'm going to follow. And it's been almost 2 years since I made that promise. And the things that my inner voice have brought me to have been infinitely more wonderful and vibrant than I could have brought myself to just with my mind.
Yeah.
So for me, that's what the mystery is about. It's like I could never have anticipated what my inner voice would guide me to, what being in union with life, with the universe would really unfold for me. I never could have anticipated it. And if I had tried, I would have made something so mediocre in comparison. So being in union for me, like being with the mystery, it's total surrender, but it's also like, how good can I let it get?
Yeah.
Like, how willing am I for my life to dazzle me? And am I also willing to kind of be pulled down the current rather than trying to swim and force and choose the location? It's just been, for me, this beautiful balance of co-creation, but also total allowing and total surrender. And the unfolding has just been really beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I mean, it always sounds so, I feel like it always sounds so beautiful and like so ethereal kind of. And it's like, this beautiful unfolding. And I feel like what my experience has been with this is that I've had a lot of inner unfoldings because I feel like I'm in a place of my life where that was and still is very, very important. And I feel like I'm now like entering this sort of season, and I don't know how this will continue to unfold, but I feel like now is kind of a time where things start to fall into place in the outside where I've always known they would be or fall in a way. And what I'm actually wanting to ask is like, how would you see these times of like, oh, the inner voice is actually guiding me, but like nothing is happening or like nothing is beautiful or, I'm kind of like crawling through the mud. This is what I've called like the last season of my life because I once played a game with people and there was this question. It was like these sentimental questions that you ask each other, these kinds of games. And there was one question like, what would you call your chapter, that you're in right now in your life? And I was like, crawling through the shit. and like, but knowing that there is a light in the end, like I know that I have to just like keep going and, be there for me and, learn to love myself and, be with me, connect to my inner voice, do all the things that are good for me and really like learning to decipher like what do I actually want to do and what not. But like nothing really changed dramatically. There were like beautiful things coming in and out, but it wasn't like, oh, I was in this magical place. So I would like love to hear your perspective on this place that we sometimes are in that feels kind of dark and, the unknown and we don't know what's going to happen. And like, how do we cope with that,
Yeah, I love this question. I feel like I have it's so funny. My answer to this question has really shifted, I think, because of where I am right now, actually like physically on the planet. And I wouldn't be where I am physically on the planet if my inner voice hadn't told me to come here because my mind thought it was the last place in the world I wanted to be.
Yeah.
So my answer to your question is I'm living in a place right now where the seasons are very clear and very prominent. Like I just had a proper winter and I lived in California for 5 years before I was traveling. So I lived in a place where there really wasn't seasons for a long time. It's just kind of, yeah, of course it gets a little bit cooler in certain areas, but it's like, especially in Southern California, it's the same pretty much all year round. And so I wasn't really in union with this idea of seasons, but I'm on the East Coast of the US right now. And we had a crazy winter. In my perspective, locals would say no, but in my perspective, it was a crazy winter. And it's really helped me see that just as the earth moves through seasons, so do we. So like that crawling through the mud, I've started to look at that as winter. So in the fall, we harvest, right? And then the fields are bare. And if we're only comfortable during harvest season, or if we're only comfortable during labor season when you're planting and watering and tending and all that, then when things are bare, it's really uncomfortable for us. It feels like we need to be doing something, right? So I had the similar experience as you're describing over the winter. Energetically, for me, a lot of it felt like crawling through the mud. But then on the equinox that just happened on the Northern Hemisphere, it really shifted for me. Like I really felt like a plant that had pushed up from the dirt. And it just really landed for me on a different level, that we have seasons in the same way the planet does. And I think for a lot of us, winter tends to feel like the slough, like the struggle,
Yeah.
right? Because there's it's so bare and we're very
Yeah.
raw. And the areas where we're used to, or I think where we're sort of taught to expect to see the beauty, which is the spring and summer, right? Like the blooming and the unfolding. Like as humans, we're really conditioned to only see the outcome as the sacred part. And I feel like winter has taught me that I can't have the harvest, I can't have the bloom without the rest and the recuperation period. I'm hoping, like today, present day Krystal would say, I hope I will honor that better next winter, instead of struggling through it so much, because I suffered through it a little bit.
Yeah.
And just on the equinox this last week, I feel like my awareness really shifted. So hopefully next year there's more joy in the winter.
Yeah. That's so interesting that you say that just recently that sort of veil has lifted, because I feel the same way. It's so strange because, and I feel like also in my, some people's lives that I know about, they have also been going through these like shifts towards more lightness. And I feel like for me, I so relate to what you were saying about suffering your way through it in a way, because I feel like, even when we're suffering, even when we're in these dark places or in these, a little bit harder places, there are nice things coming in, or, and also leaving and stuff. What you were also saying, I need to do something, to get out of here and stuff. And I was like totally in this headspace a long time. And then I kind of, for some reason, I don't know if it was me, I don't know if it was like something else, but I started to feel like I don't need to change anything. Like I can just be here and just concentrate on this moment and do the things that I want to do, and kind of pull my focus away from the things that I wanted to change and wanted to be different, because, for me, it's a lot of health is a lot of that stuff. So I was like, to be like completely healthy and vibrant and blah. And so, but when I started to not ignore that part, but nurture myself through that and not suffer my way through that, but kind of like nurture and be there for me, really take my own hand and be my own parent, and like be so kind to whatever comes up, even if that's suffering, even if that's pain, even if that's like sadness, whatever it is, longing, to like be there for myself. And I feel like that has shifted so much for me, to like make the distinction of like, oh, I have so many parts of myself that are suffering or that want something different, that want to protect me. But when I come back to my inner voice, and take on that perspective of my inner voice, my soul, my higher self, whatever you want to call it, and from that place, mother these parts of me, that was so huge for me, because then suddenly I was kind of treating myself like I have a lot of kids in myself. That sounds so weird, but like, okay, we're going to do this now. We're going to go relax now. Everyone can now just like relax and like, it sounds so weird. Yeah, I think it shifted so much for me, and to allow myself to rest a lot and not have to be on the same energy level all the time. And that, I feel like it shifts so much if we allow ourselves to do that.
Yeah, of course. Because what you're saying is like there's harmony within, right? Like all these parts of you, I think we all have these parts. And I think most people, when they're suffering, are trying to either ignore all the parts or are making some of them wrong. Right? And so we end up creating this like internal battlefield. And if that's what's happening inside, it doesn't really matter where you take yourself. If internally there's no stillness, there's no peace, there's no ease, there's no union, it doesn't really matter where the body goes. Like those feelings will come with it. So what you're describing is like, in my opinion, like the real root of peace, because your circumstances will change around you. Our circumstances will always change. Life is dynamic. Things change, like relationships. We move our physical bodies. We have new homes, jobs come and go. The work we care about, our creativity fluctuates. Like everything fluctuates. But if we are able within to sort of love ourselves, I love how you said that, like love all parts of ourselves through that process, then again, it just brings this sense of union. Like I'm okay with whatever unfolds. And I've come to see what unfolds in my life, especially the hard things. I say this to clients when we're doing beanbag releases. If someone has something really heavy, which tends to happen, I tend to attract people that have a really big thing that needs to come out and they've not been able to find another way to do it. That's kind of my superpower, because I'm so grounded in knowing that the bigger the beanbag, the bigger the amount of freedom you have on the other side of the release. So for most people, they're terrified of this thing. And I'm like, no, we're celebrating it, because if this thing feels like it is the size of the Eiffel Tower, well, then that means you have the size of the Eiffel Tower available to you in your energy to feel free, to feel open, to feel whatever is on the other side of that. So I love what you're saying about I do the same thing, like talking about sort of bringing all of your parts along. I think about it in a minivan. I'm like, the parts of me that are like having temper tantrums and rebelling and all these things, they're in the back seat of the minivan. And I'm like, I can hear them and it's fine. But I think the key is just to not let them drive anymore, right? Like they can come along, come on the journey, but I'm driving, or my inner voice. I like when my inner voice drives.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. You know, I feel like sometimes these parts they do take over. I mean, for me personally, like they still, they take over. I identify with them and all that. But I think even knowing that, that is temporary too, and that these parts will step back at some point again. And also that I can, if it's possible, because sometimes, when we're in a panic or whatever, it's like really, really hard to disidentify with that part of yourself, even though it's not you, but it's so afraid or it's so sad or whatever, that sometimes we just need to let them, run their little course. But like just knowing that even if I'm in such a place, or if this is like a longer thing that's going on, a phase or whatever, that I know where I have to go, that I know I can come back to my inner voice. I know that I can come back to myself. And I think that is also something that kind of takes away of the fear of the unknown for me, because I kind of know that, there are so many things that I don't know about the future, but I know that if I'm always close to myself, if I'm always kind with my inner self, with all my inner parts, with everything that I'm taking with me, with all my burdens and all that stuff, if I'm kind with it, and if I still learn from it, and if I'm open to life's invitations and like look for where I can grow, it's just logic that it just cannot get any worse. Of course, there can be like curveballs and people can die and things can happen and blah, blah, blah. I know that I cannot lose this connection to myself ultimately. Of course, I can forget about it, but I cannot lose it. And once the seed is there, once you've been connected with this part, I don't think we ever lose it again in our lifetime. I mean, we come to Earth having forgotten and growing up, forgetting even more. But, as soon as we kind of connect again, I feel like it can't really leave us again, because we know the way. And I think that's kind of all we kind of need to know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think we can cover it and bury it, but it can't actually be removed from us.
Yeah. And I think that brings so much peace, especially with all the unknowingness that comes with life and all the hardships that comes with being human, because I feel like this inner voice part of us, or this inner loving kindness, I feel like it's our center and what we're made of. But I feel like a human has so much more of an experience in the physical world, right? Like we have a body and we have emotions, we have things, we have relationships, we have like circumstances that we're in. But, so like to respect that too, that we're not just this, that we don't always have to be peaceful and enlightened all the time,
Yeah.
because we are human, and to be compassionate with that. I think that's so, so important too. And then we can allow ourselves to sometimes be a really afraid human, but at the same time also know that we are this really, really wise human too,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could call them lower frequency emotions, whatever. To me, it's only really lower, like quote unquote lower, when we make a home there.
Yeah.
Right? We are each designed to experience the full spectrum of emotions. And I truly believe there are gifts in all of them, and there are reasons for all of them, and that they're all invited and purposeful. But I think it's in the lower emotions, when we make a home there, that's where things become really problematic, where we identify with them, right? Like if you're experiencing grief, or if you're experiencing shame, that's the same thing as just sometimes you experience a shower. These are just parts of our experience, right? But if you make a home, if you identify, I am shame, or I am a shameful person, or my life is something to be ashamed of. To me, that's the distinction. If you feel stuck there, your home address becomes your shame or becomes your grief, that to me is where something is off. But just the experience of it, to me, is so completely beautiful and part of the journey we all signed up for, to come to Earth. I really believe that.
Yeah, that's so true. Also, I would love to hear from you, because we talked a little bit before this episode, and I would love to hear what your process was from following your inner voice regardless and unconditionally, because I feel like that is such a bold and beautiful thing to do, and it can be so scary for so many people. I remember before I started with inner voice, I think I listened to Jess's an episode that she did about her inner voice, and I was like, how can she be so reckless and just follow her inner voice? What? You need to have the control. And of course, now it feels so much more, I don't know, sensical, is that a word? But it feels so much more true and logical for me to actually follow my inner voice than my mind. Of course, I need to consult my mind, because we still live in a physical world, But I would love to hear a little bit from your life, how that has unfolded for you. And also, what we talked about, sometimes that these things need a long time to actually become real, and that we're ready for what our inner voice has told us. I would love to hear about that.
Yeah. Yeah. In my experience, my inner voice gives me big packages of, it's not necessarily a package, because it's usually a single thing, but I often receive really big nudges for my next step. And sometimes it's the direct next step, and sometimes it's the spark that will unfold. The biggest one that I had when I made that promise to myself that I would follow my inner voice no matter what it said, I shared this story on the Flow Motion episode. So if anybody wants to hear the whole story, go listen to that. But
I link it.
Yeah, perfect. But the Spark Notes version of that story, and kind of part one, because part two is what I'm in right now, I had sort of allowed myself to release all of my connections to my previous home, which was Los Angeles. I had flown out of the house I was living in. I had put all of my stuff in storage. I had sublet my car. I knew I didn't want to live there anymore, but I didn't know where I wanted to live. And I had also wanted to travel solo that's something I had wanted for years, and had a plan to do that in 2020, and then obviously could not. So at the end of 2021, I decided it's time. All of the things that I've been using as reasons for why I can't travel are not in my life anymore. And so I have to take this leap. So I was packing to go visit my mom, who at the time was living in the South in the US. And I have to be at the airport in a couple of hours. And my inner voice said, "You're not packing for what you think you are." And I was like, I don't have time for this. Like, I have to go to the airport. Like, I don't have time for games. But I had that feeling. I had this memory of like, I've made this promise to myself. When my inner voice speaks, I listen. So I was like, okay, fine. So I sit down on the couch and I'm like regulating my nervous system, because I can feel that what my inner voice is trying to tell me is really big. And my body initially kind of freaks out. So I'm sitting on the couch, I'm breathing, I'm just like trying to get myself into the state where I can actually receive the inner voice. And my inner voice just says one word, it says London. And at the time, I had absolutely no interest in traveling to London. Like, again, go back and listen to Flow Motion if you want to hear the whole story. But I ended up going and
to London.
To London.
Yeah.
I ended up going to London, and I thought I would spend a couple of weeks there as my kind of like first stop of my solo travel, and then I would move on. And in the last 2 years, it's where I've lived the longest. Like, everything in my life has changed as a result of my inner voice telling me to go to a place that my mind had no interest in going to. So that was in winter of 2021. It's now spring of 2023. And I've really come to be able to hold and understand that that's where I want to live. And I think I knew as soon as I got there, but again, like, it was too much for my mind.
Yeah.
That was way too much for my mind. If my inner voice had said, we're taking you to your new home, I would have freaked out. I wouldn't have been able to hold it. I wouldn't have been able to listen. That would have been too much for me. And I love that about the inner voice. Like, the mind thinks it wants to know every detail and every step and all the unfolding, and it just actually doesn't. Like, if it really knew where you were headed, it would freak out because it doesn't yet believe it's safe to have all of that. So these big nudges that my inner voice gives me, I've come to understand, it gives me the coordinates of where I'm headed on my path. And then the unfolding, frankly, is me getting out of my own way to walk to those coordinates that my inner voice has set. So last fall, I was in London. I had left and come back a couple of times, I think. And I'm just like, I'm really having a hard time, not necessarily being in London. I'm just having a hard time in general. It was just before the eclipse season last fall, which was so intense. And I'm really like, I'm suffering in my journey, right? But I don't want to leave this place because London feels more like home than anywhere else does. And I can feel my inner voice is kind of nudging me like, you need to leave. You need to go back to Los Angeles, first of all, and kind of like release your life there. My stuff was still there. My car was still there. I hadn't really let it go. And it said, and you need to go spend time with your mom on the East Coast. And to my mind, that is the last place on the planet I wanted to be. Like, my mom and I have, at that time, we had as good of a relationship as we could have, but still like not a place where I found solace or ease. Like, we have never had that kind of relationship. Even as I say this now, like, that has changed rapidly since being here. But my inner voice told me you need to release California and you need to go spend time with your mom on the East Coast. And again, I listened. Like, I just have arrived in this place where I know that my inner voice is connected to something bigger than my mind has access to. And I'm just frankly more interested in what the universe wants of me than what my mind wants for itself. It's just more interesting to me.
Yeah.
So when my inner voice sets those coordinates, I go. And so I got here on the East Coast in December. I have been back to London once because I can't help myself, but I've pretty much been here otherwise since December. And I had no idea why. I knew my inner voice was telling me to come here, but I had no idea why. I had no idea for how long. I didn't know anything. I just knew get to this place. So I could see as far as driving my car, which I did from California to New Hampshire, like across the entire country. That's as far as I could see when my inner voice told me to come back. Like, I had no idea what was going to unfold on the other side of that. And it's so clear to me now, this was another coordinate set. My inner voice knew I needed to come here to pull up the last of the roots that were holding me down and heavy. right? I was in a session with my inner voice recently and I was like, I need to know. Like I've done this long enough. I've been here without knowing for 3 months. I need to know why I'm here. And it said enjoyment camp. It said you're so good at creating what you want on the physical plane, but you're not yet very good at fully letting yourself enjoy it. So I'm here learning how to do that because the things that I want, like the visions that I have, the new coordinates that have been set, I know and my inner voice knows I don't want those things if I can't enjoy them. If I feel too guilty that my life is that good, I'm not going to be in union with the unfolding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I feel like the inner voice, when it gives us things that we don't really understand, because sometimes I feel like my inner voice also sometimes brings me experiences or people into my life.
Yeah.
Where I sometimes like in the end think like, what? Like, I thought like following my inner voice would be like so great. And like, I would just, just only get beautiful and like amazing things, But then when I look a little closer and sometimes when it needs a lot of emotional processing to get there, but once I do, and once I take on this like higher perspective and like ask myself, what's the invitation here, I suddenly see that through these situations or through meeting these people, I grow or I learn something about what I want and especially what I don't want. And I love what Bella always says about data collecting. I think this is so, like, I personally resonate with this so much because of experience that shows us what we don't want, I think is almost like as valuable as an experience that shows us what we do want. Because for me, for example, I've like recently learned so much about relationships and about what I need and what I don't need and what I want and what I don't want. And I know that, it will show me for the rest of my life that I won't enter the same situations again. I think if we don't really let the inner voice kind of show us, or if we let the inner voice show us, but we don't really integrate it and process what we have to process through this experience, which may be a shitty one or maybe an amazing one, but it's like gonna stop at some point or whatever, like we move away, like, right, you're now not in London anymore.
Yeah.
But like if we like look at this experience and actually ask ourselves or the inner voice, why did this happen and what did I learn from it, and like look back and see our growth, because I think it's all about like having your eyes or senses open about what can this teach me. And I think it's like a little game, It's like, it's almost as if you're like playing this computer game and you always like level up and like,
yes.
I mean, I don't like the term like leveling up because but in a sense it's true. But I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but it's like expanding. I think expansion is the right word, because whenever we go through something and we actually learn what we have to learn through it, which will become clear to us, especially if we connect to the inner voice and ask it about it and stuff, then we can't help but expand. And I think that's the magic of it all. And I think the more we expand, the more magical things also come into our lives. But it's not, for me personally, I've recently found that it's really not about having all the magical stuff and living this magical life and like getting to a place of like dreamland, but it's really about doing whatever feels good to me right now. It's like just about, what do I want? It's not about like having to manifest from the mind all the things that it thinks that it wants, right? It's like the big car, the big house, blah, 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 but rather about the right now and what do I want right now. And if we then do this every step of the way, we will automatically get to a place that is more our own. And it's really about finding alignment with our soul and who we are than it is about getting somewhere, I feel like.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's so beautiful what you're saying about your experience.
Thank you. I'm glad we're talking about it now and not like a month ago. I really agree with you about, I love what you said. What am I being invited into, or what's the invitation here?
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And I'm so with you. I think one of the biggest illusions that, or reframes, I think, that I've like really landed in my body that serves me so deeply is seeing certain experiences as bad. Like I never do that anymore. It's just what's happening, and I have the option to find a gift in it, or I don't. Like I have that choice. We all have that choice. But I in my body fully believe that everything that unfolds is for me in my life. Everything that unfolds in my reality is for me. And so, as you're saying, it's all an invitation. So if I'm suffering, there's an invitation. That's actually how that whole inner voice session unfolded recently. I was suffering. I was suffering my experience. I was suffering my reality. I was not enjoying what I was doing. And I was like, I know. And it was going on for too long. That's how I know. I allow myself to be in those states, but I have this like internal alarm system where when it goes for too long, my inner voice is like, excuse me, I have something to say. Like, you need to hear from me on this one. And that's what prompted me to reach out, was like the experience of suffering. And the situation hasn't changed. I'm still in the physical place I don't want to be, but I'm not suffering it anymore because I understand what it's for. And it's almost like you get recalibrated to the coordinates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny how like, how in a way we have like totally different experiences, of course, but like in a way we are in a way sort of synchronized, I feel like, because I've also had the same experience of like not wanting to be in the physical place that I'm in right now. And then I had this, what I talked about earlier, like this, it feels like a falling away of the heaviness, and just like allowance has stayed. And like now something has showed up where I probably will change my physical place. Like I'm probably going to move into like this flat but just for a short time, but it will still be like a complete like change of scenery. And I was like, when I heard about it, I was like, I don't know if I should do it, blah, blah, blah. But it's so interesting how sometimes our minds are afraid and it thinks about all the things that can go wrong. But then there's this tingle inside of you that is like, I also love feeling into the both of the options. Like either I could just continue on with what I'm doing. I continue, everything stays the same. Sometimes, right, we get invitations or we have to make a choice. We can apply it to so many things. Like either we just continue and we know what's coming, or we choose something else, don't know what's coming, and there is this little sparkle in it. Of course, if it feels really heavy and it's like, no, don't do it, right? But if there's this fear, but also this sparkle, and it's like, oh, it would be something different than to what I'm experiencing now, even though if the now is totally fine, But I think it just feels so much more alive to choose the option that is the unknown, and that is like, it's kind of exciting me. And I think it's so beautiful how these things then naturally unfold if we kind of get out of the heaviness and out of the like, oh, I need to like, trying to like, we have this saying in Germany where it's like you run through the door with your head, right? As if we're trying to like move forward, but head first. And it's like, nah, that sounds hurtful. I don't want to like get a concussion every time I like do something. So what if we lead with the heart? It's, I don't know where I'm going with this. It's like, so there's so much there, but yeah, I think just like following this little sparkle, and even if it then is shitty or a shitty outcome or whatever, we still will have learned something. Like this is something that I actually see in every freaking situation that I'm in. Even if I feel like it's like layered. It's like small situations. Maybe we miss the bus, or maybe something, I don't know, we miss a meeting, or we have to cancel something or whatever. And then even then we can learn about, I chose myself, or, I had a little bit more time to breathe, or I had whatever it is, what space opened up in that time. Or like another layer is these, phases that we undergo, I feel like, and then they can either be something really beautiful unfolding, and that could be the reason, but also it could be the reason that, we had to learn something because it was kind of maybe a little bit shitty or whatever. And then there are these big, big things, which I also really want to mention for everyone listening, who are like, I feel shitty all the time. It's like this really big thing. And I love what you said about if you have the Eiffel Tower of a burden on your chest, that's how much space will you free when you go through that. But I feel like sometimes these things don't make sense. Like sometimes we're not privileged, or we have an illness, or we feel like we always are unlucky in relationships, or I don't know, like things that are really big that kind of continue on for most of our lives, or for most of the life that we have lived until now. When we look at it and we don't know what it's about, to like first honor the feeling of frustration and the fear and the feeling that it's, what's unjustified, but also then to know that also that will have a reason, and maybe we'll find out in another lifetime. I hate that a little bit because my mind is like, oh, but I don't want to like wait until like 3 more lives until I can let this go. So I guess that's also an invitation to be more in the present, because we can still live in the present even when we're traumatized and all that. I feel like to also, of course, honor these feelings that come up with that, because it's like it's so unkind to push this away. And even if we push it away, to still be kind to the pushing away. Infinite loop. But I think it's so interesting to look at it from these different layers that, maybe what we have to learn, or what is there for us, the data that we have to collect, maybe will not be apparent to us. And also maybe we just don't see it because we are not open enough, or, we need to release some more beanbags. We need to release some more resistance, and as you said, the inner voice doesn't give us things that we don't want to know.
Yeah. It's kind. The inner voice is kind. Like if you can't hold it, it's not going to give it to you.
Yeah.
Right? And I used to see that as yet. It's not going to give it to you yet. I think that's such an important correction, actually. Yet. Because it will when it's time, when it's safe for you to hold it, it will. One of the things that I had an experience a couple of years ago, shortly after I got to London, that really anchored what you're saying so deeply in my body, of how the inner voice always knows and is always setting me up to support me, even if I don't understand why yet. So on New Year's Eve, a couple of years ago, I had just moved into a new flat in London. I was like pet sitting and was in an area I'd never been in before. And I had COVID, so I hadn't left the apartment since I'd gotten there. And New Year's Eve was the first day that I was like post the 10-day window, right? So I wanted to get out. I wanted to go outside of the apartment. So I wanted to go take my laptop and go work at a coffee shop. And so I was using Google Maps on my phone to find different places. And every coffee shop I went to was either closed because it was New Year's Eve, or super busy and I couldn't get a seat. And I ended up walking around the entire neighborhood and getting so frustrated because I was like, in my mind, I'm like, I need to work. Like I'm frustrated because I haven't left the house in 10 days and I just like want to get out, and I'm annoyed and I just want to go sit somewhere and it's busy everywhere and that place is closed and they don't have Wi-Fi. And I was just like so frustrated. But my inner voice kept telling me, try this place, try this place, try this place. And I ended up walking the whole neighborhood and never found a coffee shop. And so I went back to my flat and was so frustrated. Didn't get the work I wanted to get done, whatever. Later that night, I went to an event on a completely different side of town in an area of the city I'd never been to before. And I, at that time, didn't yet have service on my cell phone. I hadn't figured out how to get service in the UK. And so I could only use my phone when I had a Wi-Fi connection. So what I would do would be screenshot my transit directions before I left, so I would know how to get back from the place that I was going. Well, on New Year's Eve, when I did that, I screenshotted buses that were not running after midnight. And the event that I went to, obviously New Year's Eve, ended after midnight. So when I got out, I didn't know how to get home and I couldn't use my cell phone. And everyone around, like I remember I was at a kirtan, so it was a sober event, but I left thinking I knew exactly where to go to get home. And I walked to the bus stop I'm supposed to go to, and it's in front of a pub and everyone is absolutely wasted. And I was like, well, I'm not going to ask any of them how to get home. So I was like, I'm just going to figure it out. I'm just going to go towards the city center and I'll figure it out. I take a bus towards the city center. I get myself there. I ask someone at the train station, like, where do I need to go to get myself close-ish to this area? Somebody helps me. I get off the tube And I realized the exit to the tube station is just outside of the perimeter of where my inner voice had me circle earlier that day. And because I had walked across the entire neighborhood trying to find a freaking coffee shop, I knew how to get myself home from the tube station without a map. Like, after that experience, I was like, I get it. I get it. My inner voice knew later today, you're going to be lost and you're going to need to know this neighborhood. So we're going to walk you all around it. And the only way we're going to convince you to do that is if your mind thinks it's finding a place to work.
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, I feel like these experiences can also, we can scale them up to like a, not a like immediate, like you're going to learn this today so you can use it later. But it's like, maybe you'll learn this in an earlier part of your life so you can use it later. So I feel like this is such a, oh my God, I love this image. I love this story because it's making it so visible, what it means to like follow the inner voice. Because I feel like I don't really like saying that the inner voice is like an oracle or like that it knows the future or something like that. But I feel like intuition, because it's like, right, it's like non-physical. So there isn't really time. I feel like, that is what makes these things possible, right? It's like, it's not that it looks into the future of like what's going to happen, but it's more like, it's more like an intuition. I don't know how to explain it. I don't think it's really explainable, but that's so beautiful. I mean, I love these things. And also when I look at things that happened to me and then I look at why I needed to go through them. I mean, I wouldn't have found this health condition that I have. I have like a metabolism issue, which is quite it's not very, even the mainstream medicine hasn't really accredited it. So it's like, it's a little bit alternative, like, let's say, but I'm treating it and I wouldn't have found this diagnosis if I hadn't followed my inner voice. And I think that is so crazy how if we just follow these nudges and it's these things that interest us, but like don't do the things that we think we have to do out of fear of like not having done enough or like having losing out or something like that. But if we follow the things that give us this little like, I think it pulls me there, and like read the book that we have to read. And then suddenly through like all these, bridges of incidents, we get there. And I think that's so wild to me, because if we always just try to like figure it out with the head, it's just like what you said in the beginning, it's so much more mediocre. And I don't want to like say this in a way of like value or something like that. It's just the perspective, the way we see life. And if we do it through the inner voice, everything becomes more meaningful and more magical. And it's not in a way of like shaming or whatever, because we give everything meaning. Like the mind gives some meaning to everything, right? We could also go through the inner voice experiences and don't give it any meaning. Like that would also, right? That's probably what Eckhart Tolle does. I don't freaking know. It's like it's just like living in the now and like not attaching to anything, blah, 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 blah. Just being. And, then we don't even have to learn things and we don't have to give meaning to anything. But I think it's so magical to give meaning to things, because it feels so, people look for the meaning of life, and it's like, it's right there. It's what you make it. And I feel like if we use the mind, we put a lot of shame onto things and we put a lot of guilt and, oh, this is because you're bad, or I'm not good enough, or, I'm always in shitty relationships because I'm a bad person. I'm not lovable. And we give it these meanings that are really hurtful. But what if we just see it as like, okay, what can I learn here? And how is this serving me in a way? And I know that it can feel really triggering sometimes if we're in really, really dark places. And to also honor that, that we don't have to see it that way, right? It's just it's a choice, but I can totally see how one can see that it's not a choice, because I'm also sometimes in these places where I'm like, fuck that,
Yeah.
It's not a choice. But then in other moments, I'm like, of course, it's the remembrance. It's always the forgetting, the remembering, the forgetting, the remembering that we all go through as humans in all our lives, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Thank you so much for being here. It was so lovely to talk to you, and I hope we can do it again sometime. And thank you for everything.
Likewise, Miriam. Thank you so
shared.
much for the invitation to come on. It was lovely. Thank you.
Oh, and if somebody wants to find you, where can they find you?
My website is the best place. Thank you for asking. It's theoralab.co. You'll find all the things there. My offers and my journeys fluctuate a lot. Me and my inner voice are having a lot of fun bringing that perspective of seasonality into the work that I do as well. So it changes what's available, but you can always find it at the website.
Amazing. I'll link it below. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Miriam. Thanks, everyone.
Ich hoffe, dir hat diese Folge gefallen. Mir hat es einfach so viel Spaß gemacht, mit Krystal zu reden, und ich fand es einfach so eine angenehme Konversation und finde es auch so wichtig, einfach diese menschliche Erfahrung zu ehren und einfach anzuerkennen, dass wenn wir wirklich der Inner Voice folgen, dass es vielleicht nicht immer nur super Instagrammable ist, sondern dass es einfach wirklich bedeutet, dass wir uns selber begegnen und wirklich uns auch die schweren Fragen stellen und auch die schweren Entscheidungen treffen, die uns dann aber ultimativ viel glücklicher machen und wir so viel über uns lernen und über das Leben lernen und einfach mehr ankommen da, wo wir sind und uns wirklich so wie so eine vollständige Person fühlen und diese Liebe, die eben in uns wohnt, die ja unsere Inner Voice ist, unsere Intuition, unser liebevolles Bewusstsein, unser Herz, die einfach zu spüren, ist einfach so für mich persönlich einfach immer so ein, wie sagt man, so reassuring, einfach zu wissen, okay, ich muss nichts im Außen verändern oder verbessern oder sonst was. Es beginnt immer mit mir im Inneren und von dort aus, von diesem Ort kann ich dann ins Handeln kommen, Inspired Action. Ich hoffe, dir hat die Folge gefallen. Ich werde natürlich weiterhin deutsche Podcast-Folgen machen, gar keine Frage. Und wenn du dich für meinen Kurs anmelden möchtest, mach das super, super gerne. Ich freue mich so sehr, wenn du dabei bist. Ich freue mich einfach so sehr auf diese kleine Gruppe und euch dann das Ganze so ein bisschen näher zu bringen, wirklich in die Inner Voice zu gehen und bedingungslos für sich selber zu sorgen, für sich da zu sein, sich für sich einzugestehen und ein bisschen sanfter, das Leben einfach sanft zu leben und in Alignment mit unserem eigenen Herzen. Den Link findest du in den Shownotes und ich wünsche dir eine ganz wunderbare Woche, wunderbaren Tag, was auch immer. Fühl dich ganz doll geherzt und wir hören uns beim nächsten Mal wieder, wenn du magst. Bye, bye.